Although we are sharing this year's events virtually, the festival is based in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and we respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has been lost forever and can never be recovered. We also acknowledge the island of Uktahumguk, Newfoundland, as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq, and we acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Ntsinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatuhavut. We recognize all First Peoples who are here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First Peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Whiteman. I'm actually Dr. Carol Whiteman. I am here on the unceded and traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations, known as British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada. And I'm a grateful settler working, living, and playing on these lands. And I'm here today to moderate a really hot topic, continuing topic of conversation about intersectionality and bigger budgets for women-led feature films. I just want to create some context here for the conversation and give it just a couple of opening remarks just to set the landscape here. Recently, in this year, 2021, a study was released by Canada's Women in View, and a similar study, I understand, was released in Sweden. We have Anna Serner here on the panel. I'll get to the introductions fully in a moment, but just to contextualize us, we've been having studies and reports coming out on a regular basis for the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years. We can talk about that in the conversation. But what is really clear in the most recent studies is that while initiatives that are designed for greater inclusivity for women, let's say, while they're working, they're moving the dial, some folks are being left behind, and particularly at the higher budget level. And so that's what we're going to unpack a little bit today. And I just wanted to acknowledge the work that Anna brings to the table from the Swedish Film Institute regarding the 50-50 by 2020 initiative, or that I'm going to call it generative image, that kind of sparked us into a movement that was framed in a time frame that gave us a deadline and an urgency, and at the same time spoke about gender. Now, it did speak about gender in a binary kind of way, so we'll talk about that as well. But it was a start and a spark and a call, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. In my own doctoral work, I also observed in the 25 years of working with women directors through the program that I run, Women in the Director's Chair, I observed a concept over and over again. And I started to really dig deeper into it. And it's about this notion of confidence. And it's not just confidence at the self level, it's confidence that's external. Dr. Rosabeth Moss-Cantor from the Harvard Business School talks about it in terms of internal confidence and external confidence. So I kind of like to throw that into the conversation as well, because the image that came to my mind when I was doing my doctoral work was that confidence is a kind of continuum. It's self, it's confidence with and from others, it's confidence in the institutions that we're working with and the organization. So it's external and internal. So I'd like us to talk a little bit about that, because what I've also observed is that that confidence continuum is broken and has been broken for a very long time for women, for underrepresented communities, and that's what we're here to talk about today, is that bridging that pathway to the resources and to reaching audiences at a grander, greater scale, and that means bigger budgets. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our guests today, and I'm going to start with the filmmakers. I'm going to start with you, Ann Marie Fleming. Welcome to the panel. And I just want to give a little context of Ann Marie's background. She's an independent Canadian filmmaker whose work deals with themes of family, history, and memory. And she's broken through the noise, as it were, through the course of her career, and has created beautiful work that has been screened at TIFF and around the world, and including an early animated feature documentary, The Magical Life of Long Tack Sam, about her vaudevillian great-grandfather, the dark comedy, The French Guy, the adaptation of Bernice Einstein's I Was a Child of Holocaust Survivors, and Old Dog, a contemplation about aging. So Ann Marie, your work has spanned a lot of different topics and genres and formats, including the beautiful and inspiring Window Horses that takes place at a poetry festival in Iran, which was awarded Best Animation Feature by the Asian Pacific Screen Awards, and features the wonderful voice talents of Sandra Oh. I can go on and on about your accolades and the future projects that you've got cooking there. And I'm going to ask this question to all of you. What brought you to this work? What was the call that brought you to the work that you're doing? Why do you tell stories, Ann Marie?
Oh my goodness, Carol, that's like such a big question. But you know, I think I was born a storyteller. You know, I've always written. I've always had media, you know, in my life. My grandfather was a radiologist, but he's also a photographer. He always had, you know, he had the first of everything. Like there was always video equipment around. There were always Super 8 equipment around. I was always playing around. But as a, you know, a child of immigrants, the arts was always supposed to be a hobby. You know, it wasn't supposed to be something that you chose to go into as a, you know, I don't know, a career, if you want to use that word. But when I was in England, and I'm actually in England right now, visiting my parents, this was back when I was 21 and I just finished my my undergrad, and I was having these terrible dreams, and I was becoming obsessed with twins. And in the middle of the night in Hampstead Heath, a large seagull fell on my head. And skip ahead to, I'm back in Vancouver, and I see A Z in Two Knots by Peter Greenaway. And here's this film with all of these images, these crazy images that had actually were in my life and in my head and in my dreams. And I thought, oh my God, I want to do that. I want to make films. And so I'd sort of played around with the idea as an undergrad, and I just didn't really like the whole film thing. You know, I liked making films, but I didn't like how films would have to be made. And I landed up being inspired by some student work that I saw that had come out of the Emily Carr, which was then a College of Art and Design, by animation filmmakers. And I thought I'd like to do that. And so here I am, 35 years later, here I am. And I didn't think that I wanted to be telling stories about my family, about history, about memory. I wanted to do little interstitial educational things like multiplication rock and all those little things from the 70s where I learned about the alphabet and the American Constitution somehow. That's what I thought I was going to do. But in my second year of animation, my grandmother died suddenly. She was very important to me. I made this little film, this little poem, and it was only really for myself. And it went everywhere. And I just started making personal films about, I think a lot of us who, you know, we talk about our family, we don't realize how our family is situated politically or geopolitically. And then as you get older and you learn more and you see more about context, you go, oh, Right. And so I think my whole exploration has been about that, about acknowledgement of experience and how we fit into a more, global context.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm asking these questions to give us that context so that we know each other in a way where we're coming from in this discussion. I'm going to jump over to you, Nayani, and do a little intro here. You're a working artist and storyteller for the screen. She's a big kid with big dreams of creating borderless heart work within and beyond our little big galaxy. She's the founder of Mutual Pictures, a production home rooted in mutual support, which is dedicated to making room for new waves of stories and amplifying fresh voices on screen. She's a resident in the Directors Lab at the Canadian Film Centre, the Norman Jewison Film Program. And Nayani was also recently selected as part of the Academy of Canadian Cinema and Television 2021-2022 Directors Program for Women. And at the center of Nayani's craft is care for community. She's ever grateful to her ancestors, elders, guides, and comrades for helping ensure that she continues to reach the here, now, and beyond. And I could go on and on about your work and the wonderful things about you, Nayani. But I'd like to ask you the same question that I asked Ann Marie. What has called you to this work? What do you love most? I mean, you in your biography here, you really put it out there that you're doing heart work. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I always start by acknowledging that my parents were refugees from Sri Lanka, or Tamil Eelam as you'll have it. They're Tamil refugees who arrived in the late 80s, alongside most of our community that left after a succession of major riots in Sri Lanka, targeting Tamil minority communities across the island. So, there is a lot that we have missing. I say we have a missing archive a lot of the time. I don't know what my father looks like beyond the last photo he took at the airport. I don't have any photos of my grandparents, beyond the last photos that he had, leaving. So there's so much that's been lost in that process, which of course there are so many communities that have been displaced, oftentimes displaced multiple times over. So that desire for story, for history, is always present. And from a young age, my parents, really valued us, or taught us to value rather, and really saw value in us reading and engaging in stories, in conversations, both oral storytelling and sharing of family histories, but also, the library was my babysitter. My parents didn't have much money growing up. So when we couldn't afford subsidized daycare, we would go to the library and my dad would pick us up from there. So storytelling has always kind of been the space of refuge for me and my family. And also when it comes to film and television, it's the rare time that we didn't get to go to the movies a lot, but unless it was a Tuesday, but I spent time watching TV at home with my parents. Like, those are memories that I do have. So that's really what informs at the root of it, or at the foundation, my excitement, my engagement with, and my desire to tell stories, and to participate in some kind of documentation and imagining.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Ella, I'm going to come to you. And you're a filmmaker as well as the head executive director and founder of Black Women Film Canada, and an award-winning filmmaker, impact producer, multimedia artist. And you're also an experienced creative facilitator, arts educator, community programmer, and consultant who's worked in Canada's arts and culture sector for over 19 years. You have received continued project support from both the Canada and Ontario Arts Councils, and have been presented in galleries and public spaces and film festivals around Toronto, Vancouver, Berlin, Calgary, on CBC, on everywhere. Your projects and your stories are out there. You have a master's in media arts education, a bachelor of fine arts in new media, and extensive training in creative facilitation and holistic practices. And that's where I'm going to sort of leave it, because you've got, again, lots of accolades that people can go and find on your website at Black Women Film Canada. And I'd love to ask you that question. What brought you to the space? Did you hear a call? You know, you were both a filmmaker and the head of an organization that helps facilitate filmmakers. So can you speak about that dual call that you have? It's like a dual thing happening.
And it's so funny, because I want to be completely honest that I didn't send you the most up-to-date bio, and so it's really great to listen to things I've written in the past and then be like, oh, who am I now? And so and I find that wearing those titles is also part of that journey. Like, what do we take on? But I'll talk about that in a second. What brought me to this work, yeah, I think in one sense, I have this like split between being a creator, and as a creator, I'm a producer, I am a photo video artist, I'm a writer, I'm an illustrator now too, and it's been really important, even through my research, to make more space for the Black woman within me. I remember once saying to someone, you know, I am as white as I am Black. And I remember that person just sort of like almost jumped out of their skin. They were like, what, how's this possible? You know, as someone who's racialized in every space, I still recognize that I'm carrying two different ancestries and heritage that, you know, it's not problematic, but it's something that I've had to really work through as I was growing up. And there's aspects of my Blackness that have been silenced all through my childhood. Often I would be the only Black person in most spaces. And so I think it was really familiar as I went into film and new media to find, oh, there it is again. And so I actually was pretty disillusioned with the film industry when I first got into it, and ended up moving more into the arts, where I could have more of a voice, but also working with diverse groups and giving the camera back, and you know, the tools back to diverse people, and specifically Black youth, and then Black women. And I started to see that they were going on to doing great things because of this like holistic, transformative, facilitated space that I was creating, and I was feeling so inspired. And then I also had to ask myself, but wait, why aren't you directing? Why aren't you creating work? Why aren't you producing these things? And only now have I just started a production company called Brown Rabbit Studios, and we're producing our first an animated series for CBC Kids that's centering Black kids, and we're super excited about that. And I'm working with Karen Chapman and Vanessa Magic on that. But I think really it was from this place of, where is the professional space to really uplift Black women and our voices and our work? There are so many community programs that give that first little, like, here's your first camera. We can't afford to give you proper gear, so let's just work with the DSLR, your cell phone. But I wanted to really hone in on the people who are doing this professionally, who want to be given that boost. But also, I'd always make it personal. So like, Black Woman Film is linking to my own experiences, as well as this amazing community. We've got like hundreds of Black women working in the industry who are part of our community now and our network. And you know, this last year we did Mothering in the Symposium, Mothering in the Industry Symposium. And I created a residency where we paid folks who represent as Black women, Black identified. We're also open to people who are trans women. And it was looking at those who identify as mothers, who are juggling this role of motherhood and working in the industry, et cetera. And we made it a paid residency to really value their time. And my whole point is that what I will do is I'll take some of my own struggles and then reach out to folks and go like, hey, are you experiencing this too? Like, what can we create? Or I'll also be listening to the community and whatnot. So really it came from this place of like, really the racism that exists throughout my experience growing up. from people who love me dearly. And then how do we shift that? How do we create spaces where we come together, we love each other, we support each other, and we go beyond just what's the next job, but really uplifting one another. So that was, yeah, that's a little bit of where that came from. And then still through that practice, I'm constantly coming back to like, yeah, but what are you about, Ella? What are you creating while also leading this not-for-profit?
Fantastic. It's a dual kind of conversation always where you're balancing those. I face that myself, just to contextualize as well. From my perspective, I started out as an actor in this industry, training at York University for theater, and went through that process. But I heard a call, one, to have a baby. That was one, just
Nice.
to start a family. But the other one was the call that was left by that gap when Studio D closed in
Right, the NFB.
1996. My colleagues here on the West Coast, in BC and across the country, really were talking about what's going to happen next. And Ann Marie, you are well aware of Studio D and your experience, and it had its challenges and its benefits, but it did leave a gap in Canada for women filmmakers. And so Women in the Director's Chair was born out of that call to fill the space. And always on our agenda was inclusivity, but it wasn't written down. It was just, as you say, a holistic kind of approach. And 25 years later, over 30%, 35% of our alumni are women of color, Black women, Indigenous women. There's also inclusivity in terms of gender, non-binary, and just gender identity or expression, if you will, within our membership or in our alumni base. And we just did that organically. It was just the way we felt it was important to conduct ourselves. But
I think that's how you have impact, is that I think we've always just been in response to our community. So like, to be organic, it is actually a very healthy way to maneuver as a collective or a network or an organization, though often we feel we're not allowed to. And I think it's key, because then you're actually of service to the community you're striving to serve.
Exactly. I'm going to jump over to you, Andrea, because you have you've bridged two spaces now. You've got a track record here in Canada with Inside Out Film Festival, and made some real impact there. And you're also now with an organization called ReFrame. And I promise we're going to get to this topic of big budgets. We really are. It's so important to situate where we're coming from, to visualize or dream about where we can get to, those big dreams, and what's in the way. And Andrea, you're now the director of ReFrame, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. Most recently, you were the executive director of Inside Out, Canada's largest LGBTQ film festival. You led Inside Out through a period of transformative growth. I love that word, transformative growth, that phrase, establishing the world's only international LGBTQ film financing forum. I told you we were going to get to the money. And launching 2 film funds, including an endowment to finance projects from queer women, trans, and non-binary filmmakers. During your tenure, you spearheaded a 4-year partnership between Inside Out and Netflix. So that's another topic we're going to talk about in terms of getting to the money and the budgets, to fund career and project development for LGBTQ filmmakers, co-founded the North American Queer Festival Alliance, and partnered with Out TV to build the Out on Set database for LGBTQ talent. You were named one of Canada's 15 Women to Watch by CBC, and you've been a featured guest speaker at lots of conferences and panels. I actually stalked you in a conversation you had, a few conversations you had. So I'm really excited to hear from you today, and to ask you that question: what called you to this work, and can you talk a little bit about ReFrame And, just a tiny bit about your work with the queer community as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carol. It's always a kind of out of body experience to listen to your own biography. Um, I'm so, first of all, I'm so honored to be here on this group of women that I so admire, and thank you to St. John's Women's Film Festival for putting this together. Um, you know, I find as I continue in this work, like you said, Carol, like I'm really, it is important to situate ourselves and our perspective and where we are and how we came into the work, because I think it really does inform the things that matter most to us. And, like you, I started as an actor and had really challenging experiences as a young person, alone, unprotected, supporting myself, navigating through an industry that was very unfriendly and unsafe towards women. And I moved into becoming a producer and moved into working in film festivals, honestly, because I had women who were my mentors in that space who really took the time to invest in me and help to guide and shape those early years of my career. And that showed me a path and showed me a future and showed me the power of the collective and that I wasn't alone. I think moving away from the I and towards the we of, how we all work together as collaborators. Film is a collaborative art, and advocacy is necessary to be collective. None of this happens alone. None of this happens in a vacuum. We have to really work together, and part of that collaboration also comes from like an honest confrontation of how our experiences are different, and how the work that we all bring to the space can be additive if we have space to understand those different perspectives and those different points of view. Everyone has so much to bring to enrich those conversations. So in my role at ReFrame, what really drew me into this work, and in a way drew me out of the festival and exhibition space, which I feel very passionately about from an equity perspective as well, was the opportunity to be part of a collective. ReFrame is a joint initiative of the Sundance Institute and Women in Film Los Angeles. We work with more than 50 companies in Hollywood, primarily studios and production companies, as well as a network of about 75 industry ambassadors who are executives, decision makers in the industry, to really go within the system and force systemic change. That's the end goal, right? We can see that there are so many incredible people doing incredible work and continuing to experience barriers and blocks to advancement. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation about money and budgets, because I think as women, as queer people, as people of all kinds of historically excluded backgrounds within the industry, we have to be able to talk about money. We all have trauma around it. We've faced financial precarity. We've been told that we don't have value. So to be able to talk about money and how we deserve to have access to those funds, to create content at the highest level, to distribute content at the highest level, I think is just imperative to moving forward.
That's exactly what I wanted to drill into, Andrea. Thank you so much for framing that for us. And that leads me to link that statement to external confidence, that bridging what we know in our hearts, what Ann Marie and Nayani have been talking about, and Ella too, as filmmakers, that burning story that you want to tell, and the great imagination and visioning you have around it, without the resources to make it a reality, it remains a dream. And so I think that's the bridge that we're looking to really create and bolster with conversations like this, and the work that Anna has been doing for 10 years at the Swedish Film Institute. And before I get to you, Anna, I'm just going to acknowledge that our dear Krista Dickinson was slated to join us in this conversation, but due to technical difficulties, she wasn't able to get onto the call. So just to acknowledge that Krista is the Executive Director and CEO of Telefilm Canada, which is our national funding body here in Canada. And just again, some context, Telefilm basically has 3 levels of funding, which are at that micro budget level, that talent to watch program that's undergoing some change right now. And at TIFF this year, the folks at Telefilm made some announcements about raising the bar, and now the grant program is up to 250,000 and a soft ceiling of about 500,000, whereas it was half that in the past. So Telefilm is listening to the concerns of filmmakers, like the ones on our panel, and advocates like you, Andrea and Ella, and women in film, and making some changes. And I was really
Carol,
to
I
hear.
just wanted to say that I also wanted to add that there was an advisory committee made up of many producers, directors, emerging established that came together and made those recommendations. So I just do want to give space to honor the work that triggered those changes at Telefilm. It was a year of work during the pandemic of multiple individuals across Canada submitting those suggestions, and thankfully Telefilm is listening. I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Oh, thank you for saying so. I would have called on you, Nayani, absolutely, because you and I talked about that in your role in that conversation. Yes, it was a pan-Canadian consultation on multiple levels, on online, roundtables, as you say, and so a lot of work is going into this evolution, if you will, at our national funding body, and indeed the other institutions across Canada are listening. And since about 2016, when a tipping point kind of happened, and Anna, I'm going to ask you to speak about this a little bit, in Canada at least, the institutions really came on board with this notion of 50-50 by 2020, and to really open up the conversation. There's no more blinders that there isn't an issue, and particularly at that higher budget level. And what Telefilm has done really well, I think, or at least is getting right, is that consultation process that filmmakers from all stripes are and backgrounds are being consulted. Is it perfect? No, it's never going to be perfect, but at least we're listening and we're feeling that there's a dialogue happening. So Krista wasn't able to join us today to give Telefilm's piece of the conversation. So we're going to defer that to the next round of conversations that we're going to have on this topic. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about you, Anna Serner. I watched a conversation that you had with Krista earlier this year in July that was pre-recorded, where you talked about, each of you shared about your backgrounds. And I was interested to know that your background was also as a filmmaker to start with, and and that you found some barriers, or you know, had some negative experiences, shall we say, that that caused you to take a sharp turn towards a legal profession, to study the law. And through that, in conversations with folks that you were in contact with, according to your conversation with Krista, you landed a job in I believe what was an advertising marketing firm, and from there was invited to be part of the Swedish Film Institute. And 10 years later, here you are, and you've recently stepped down. We're so sad to see you stepping aside, but I understand completely what your motives are in terms of creating more space and moving along with the work in different ways. So Anna, I've just sort of given a really brief thumbnail, and of course this is not even the tip of the iceberg in terms of your background and depth of understanding and contribution to our film communities. And you're going to talk with Andrea about that a little bit later, so I won't go too far into that realm. But I'd love to hear from you what really called you to this work, particularly in gender equality and parity, and can you speak about now what keeps you up at night?
Yes. Well, I think that we all fight for things that we can relate to, and I am a woman. I was in a leadership position. It wasn't an advertising firm. It was the guild or the association for the advertising agencies. So I was more of a spokesperson than I was one of the actual being able to do things. And being a woman, I was asked all these stupid questions about how to manage your family life and everything but my job. I saw that, and I couldn't resist acting on it. And that made me a kind of a feminist, an official feminist, as I was a spokesperson for an industry. So after 10 years being there, I was approached. I had some other jobs in between, but I was finally approached by the Film Institute, asking if I wanted to take on the job as the CEO. And for the first time, I actually did have the power myself to do, because when you are in an association, you are talking on behalf of people, and you're talking on behalf of what others should do. And I was really sick of that. I wanted to do myself, and I realized that when I will be in that position, I will be scrutinized. And that also happened. And I also told the board when they were asking me if I was interested, I said, I am interested, but I am a woman and I will be the head of the organization, and I'm a known feminist and I will not back down. So if you're not interested in me running those issues, you shouldn't take me, because I will never step down from trying to make an equal world. And they said, of course, we are interested in gender equality, which everyone says before they start working with it and the shit hits the fan, which happened. So I was scrutinized. Just a couple of months into my term, I had an appointment with no ending. So just a couple of months after I started, we were showing the films that would be premiering on cinemas that half year, and it was 8% female directors. And as being a woman and knowing my history, I knew I would get the question. So of course I were prepared, and I was by that time, very media trained. So I said immediately that is a catastrophe, in my opinion, because we will lack so many perspectives and so many stories. And that is what culture is all about, to bring out a diversity of stories and perspectives of being a human being. So I will not settle for that. I will settle for the 50-50 over a period of time. I hope the industry will work with me. And if they don't, I'm not afraid of quotas. And having that threat, I think, was the most powerful part of that conversation. But it really also meant that they heard the message. So I started off, and during the way, things started to move in terms of gender equality. And the first term of our overtime was 2016. So we were sort of summarizing in Cannes. And of course, I realized that the struggle for equality in all perspectives will not be over in my lifetime or even the next generation. So I wanted to launch the next period, and I wanted it to be noticed. So we were a group at the job, and someone just came up with a 50-50 by 2020. And it was a catchy line. And actually NASA already had it, saying that failure is not an option. So I really liked that. And so we launched it, and it really spread over the world, which I'm so happy about. But during the way, someone came up to me, actually from the Black community in Stockholm, and saying, do you know, Anna, that in my community, people don't even know that you're fighting for 50-50? And then I realized that in not being very clear in inclusion, I was actually excluding. So that was the start of doing a much more intersectional work, which ended up with our kicking off, which I wasn't able to kick it off before leaving my position, both a new action plan, and that is called 50-50 All Women. And I've been taking a lot of inspiration from Canada, actually, and Carol, but also Monique Simard, if you know her. She was with Sodec, and she was an amazing woman that did a lot of these inclusive dialogue with all women. So the new part of this is actually both to do much more reflective work on ourselves, but also in everything we do it together with all the women, so everyone feels included. And we kicked it off with launching a report. We do yearly report, and this report is named Which Women? So we made deep interviews with women of color and elderly women, elderly, but over 32, more or less. Well, a bit older actually, but so we have done a lot of counting, but also deep interviews to find out what barriers the intersectional perspectives reveal, so we can work to get rid of those ones. And then we launched, we managed to, and we have Carol and the Telefilm is working with us in that. We've been able to launch a new international film fund, which is aimed only for people that have been excluded. And it will be a self-definition of what you mean with exclusion in terms of the UN charters of human rights. It's all about race, sex, and everything, but also socioeconomics, geography, minorities. So, and it took us one phone call to get 10 countries to say yes immediately. And I think that was very hopeful that so many things has happened, because when I launched my first action plan in 2013, no one listened. And in only 8 years, there is such a big change. And so I was very happy. And then to resign, because I want to make a statement that power should always be left, because power corrupts. And I always said that, so I wanted to show that you can also do it. And that is my motto: stop talk, start to act. So that was my last action at the Film Institute.
Fantastic. Wow, that really brings us up to date in terms of that push to intersectionality, recognition of the definition of women and woman being an evolution of language. That's what we've adopted at Women in the Director's Chair, is that it's an evolution of language. We want to be inclusive of folks who may not call themselves women, but are living lives that are in keeping with or have values and missions in their lives that are in keeping with the values that Women in the Director's Chair. And you've spoken about it so eloquently too, Ella, with Black Women Film Canada. that inclusivity piece. And you, Anna, talking about this International Film Fund, we talked about it at TIFF a few years ago, and it's so gratifying that this is now starting to really take hold in 10 countries, and that we're inspiring each other. I think that's part of this conversation as well, part of the work of St. John's International Women's Film Festival, as well as the other women film festivals across Canada and around the world, is to create community and sharing of that information. Like you said, Anna, when a filmmaker comes up to you and says, I didn't know that you were doing this work, that tells us that we have to reach out further into the community deeper. So what is this? Ella?
I was wondering if it's okay for me. I just want to respond before my little one drags me away, because I know we're about to run out of time.
Yes.
And thank you so much. I heard you speak at TIFF, and it was really inspiring, and yet again, very inspiring. And when I think about the theme of this panel, which I know we're just getting into, money, more money. One of the things that we're striving to do, and what I'm seeing is a need within our community, is around folks getting development deals, these almost like testing funds, but then there isn't a lot of support to really see those people succeed. And that is huge. And so now, we're about to launch this new producer circle to support folks who actually, they've got money, they're making their feature, they're making that series, but they actually need support to manage all the pieces, or to have a safe space where they can ask questions and not have to save face or pretend like they know it all. I think what I was just trying to say is that what I'm seeing as far as this need for more money going towards my community that I am representing, but also is around supporting folks when they're given the money and the access. So it's one thing to give this almost like money that's paying lip service, first stage development deals. There's so many excuses for why more money isn't given. And what I would really like to see is just simply when these large amounts of money are going towards new groups who are coming forward, that there's support and mentorship alongside, so that they can really succeed at that next level, as opposed to this continual oh, well, they're not ready, or who are they aligned with? Half the time when someone has to align themselves with the production company, they lose the rights they need to really maintain a certain level of autonomy. Anyway, I just felt very excited by what Anna was saying. And I think that there's so much change that needs to be done. There's so much need for this, to look at intersectionality, but also to look at, one of the things we do within our programs is we look at people's experience with money, their relationship to money, to leadership. Because when you're talking about confidence, there's also this element about what happens when you finally get that platform. Do you feel supported? Can you step into your power? Have you done the things so that you feel confident to take on this role, to take on these funds, whatever it may be? And I think sometimes, we hear a lot from Black women working in the field, they still have intense imposter syndrome. And so even though this is due to systemic racism that's gone on for years and so many factors, we can end up self-sabotaging because it can feel like a lot. And so when we want to give folks more money, we also have to remember with that money comes additional support, mentorship, and time to allow people to succeed at the same level. That's all.
That is great encapsulating, Ella. In what I hear you saying is that we need to create a platform, or a program, or an understanding, if you will, that organically the system worked that way for those with privilege. There was a built-in boys network, if you will, that did exactly that in an organic, holistic way with those folks. And so what we're doing is systematizing that for our underrepresented and intersectional communities, recognizing the value of that built-in organic, what did you say, support to succeed. I like that. That's a great phrase for us to take away, is that support to succeed. I'd like to jump over to Nayani and Ann Marie to hear from you. What is bubbling up for you in this conversation, to respond to what has just been said by Ella, by Anna, by Andrea? What's bubbling up for you, Ann Marie?
Well, that nobody does this alone, right? We really, it's really a tide raises all boats. And that, you know, when you brought up Studio D before, of course, I'm sort of a generation after that, but it took me a while to understand, learn, and appreciate the shoulders that I was standing on. And I think it's very important for us to always pay it forward. And although I don't work institutionally as an advocate like you know, Andrea and Ella do, that the work they do is amazing. It's true that all film is collaborative. Everything we do is collaborative. Society is collaborative. You know, I know that time is really short, but to go back to what we said before, Carol, is that, you know, part of the reason why I've just made so much work at such a lower level financially, right? And I hope to be able to make work at a larger budget so that I can bring people with me, so that I can work with, you know, people and pay them what they deserve to be paid, what they expect to be paid. You know, in some ways, you know, from a selfish point of view, even, it's that there's all of these amazingly talented people that I don't have access to because they can't afford to work with me, you know? And so I want to be part of creating in that conversation, right? I want to be able to have that kind of and freedom, and to be able to respect the people who are working with me, and I mean financially respect them. You know, like I try to do it every other way I can, especially working in animation. Window Horses, which was remarkably low budget feature. You know, people sign up. Animation takes a very long time, and people just can't be tied up for that long. You know, unless they're getting paid well. You know, that sounds so boring, but it really just comes down to to respect.
Absolutely. Nayani, you mentioned this in our pre-conversation about being able to pay the folks that you're working with. Could you speak about that, just tagging on to what Ann Marie is speaking of?
Yeah, what Ann Marie shared also for me made me think about, I guess when we're thinking about the collaborative, like I am not here without the support of so many people. I kind of say like I grew up in Toronto, but I grew up in like, you know, various art scenes in Toronto. So people have watched me, you know, since I was a teenager until this point. And it is community, it's people writing letters, it's people explaining to me, you know, what's my best chance of getting a grant. And particularly BIPOC elders who have made space and time and energy for me. And I think that's one of the things, and I'll feed it back into paying people because that's key, but it's and all of that work was done, you know, not for money, right? And that's unfortunate, because when you think about like BIPOC filmmakers, particularly women and gender diverse folks from those communities, they're struggling the most to, you know, financially stay up and take care of their livelihoods, and they still made time. And so I think that, you know, there's something to be said about the culture shifting in film and television away from a scarcity kind of mindset, which is not everybody, but it does exist, and towards a more abundant mindset. I think then collectively we can all do better. My first job was at a union, so it's coming out in that way. But in terms of pay, yes, I mean, that's one of the hardest things we face. And I appreciate what Ella said, and it was part of the recommendations we made to Telefilm, is that a lot of us who were Talent to Watch recipients of micro budget funding felt like we were kind of set up to fail, to be honest, especially that first year with 50 projects, not intentionally so, but you know, as a byproduct of the process and the way it was done. You know, without a producer mentor, especially for those of us coming from BIPOC led festivals, you know, those of us coming from Real World and Real Asian and Imaginative and other spaces, we felt like, you know, we're not coming from a 4-year film school. We're not coming from, at that time, I wasn't coming from the Canadian Film Center. We weren't, we didn't have the same, it wasn't kind of a level playing field in terms of where we were coming from and what kind of technical experience we had, you know, practice we had. And so we didn't have the same connections even coming in. We all came in getting the same funding, but we didn't all have the same tools to succeed. And that's a problem. And so the recommendation was, you know, Telefilm has this long history of producers that they've worked with. So how about matching projects with a mentor that they know and they've supported? How about paying those mentors to do that work as part of the budget so that people are not asked to do labor for free when they're trying to also still make their own livelihood. And then, you know, one of the concerns we had was, for me and my team for our project Displaced, we wanted to hire, it was a story written by, you know, Indigenous women and 2 women of color, you know, produced and created and crewed up and full of cast that is almost, you know, I would say 95% BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and other racialized folks. And many keys of department heads were women and gender diverse folks. So, you know, thinking about that, we want to pay them, but we don't have enough money to pay all them, and we want to pay our community well, but then we don't have enough budget to actually finish the film. So it's this kind of domino effect of everything suffering, you know, and having to, we got funding from Inside Out and other spaces, and so grateful for that, because if it wasn't for that, then we wouldn't have been able to get to this point. But it's always a concern, because it's not only like when Black, Indigenous, other racialized women, and I'll always speak specifically to that because that's who I work with and those are my, you know, communities that I'm around day to day and have been for my whole life here. You know, we are the most likely to hire an inclusive, you know, group of folks, cast and crew, and not just racially, but again, gender diverse, and in so many, you know, sexual orientation, people with different disabilities. You know, we are the most likely to, I think, statistically, like hire that way, and still we get the smallest budgets, which means people from our communities are always still being paid the least. And so, you know, that's something that's always on my mind and in conversation with friends of mine and peers, and that's something that we're always concerned about. And that's a reason why, and I think I talked about this with you, Carol, is that why a lot of us consider leaving and do leave, particularly Canada, because we think that there's opportunities elsewhere. Not that it's any, not that it's extremely better anywhere else. I think every place in the world is still facing the same things that we're talking about. But you know, we get tired and exhausted, and a lot of us leave. And so what Ella said is true. Like, we get these deals, we get this money, it looks good for the funders, it looks good for everybody else, you know, supporting that, but then who gets left behind? And oftentimes it's us.
Yes, exactly. Speaking truth to power, you nailed it there, Nayani and Ann Marie, in terms of that, you know, gratitude for recognition and support, but not enough sometimes support to actually come over that finish line in a healthy way. And that's a whole other conversation about creating a healthy industry and what that takes, and not running people ragged in terms of long hours just to get it in under the wire, etc. That costs money. And so where does this come from? Andrea, can you respond to what Ann Marie and Nayani are talking about in terms of this gap, or this dream, if you will, the big dream of paying your collaborators so they'll work with you again, and that we can compete with Netflix and in Canada anyway, the service production that's coming in. Can you speak to how we can sustain that, or we've opened the door to the dream of it? What are your thoughts? What's cooking there?
Yeah, I really want to just amplify everything that Nayani said, because this is the absolute reality, which is that we at ReFrame, we evaluate completed work in terms of hiring equity. Who is hiring women? Who is hiring women of color? what in which roles, where is there still these significant gaps, and where the numbers are just not moving. And what we see time and time again is exactly that point, that it's women of color that are hiring in the most inclusive way and creating sets that are in many cases, spoken about as a better work environment. We know that this is true. And the thing that I'm really wanting to push back against in the industry in this moment is also this idea that because women of color are industrious and can make things work, that they, are because they're creating successes out of scraps, that we should continue to give them scraps. Like, no, we should absolutely move towards a model that allows for advancement in a way that is not just incremental. Like, historically, the industry has had no issue giving, a white man who's made one feature a 3-picture deal after that feature. Like, it's the precedent for that kind of going from a $500,000 feature to a $50 million feature exists in the industry. It's just exclusionary. It's only for white men. And also, many of those creatives come from generational wealth. So they were able to perhaps finance their first feature on their own, or, get support from family, or, to create that work. And that's just not the reality for so many people, so many brilliant creatives whose, stories really need to be told. So I think having these conversations in a very public way, and bringing our, the folks who control the resources into these conversations, and, saying this is not okay. I don't think any of us working in the film industry want to settle for what we've had. We all want more. We all want growth. And to have a growth mindset, we have to be open to, the work that needs to be done to get there. And, I think that the industry is driven by risk mitigation, especially at the highest levels. It is capitalism. We are talking about, profitability, and we need to really give voice to the idea that women and gender diverse people are not a risk. They are undervalued. And the stories that I've heard of, well, if we hire a woman in this role, we can't hire a woman in that role because, we have to balance our, legit, these conversations happen. And we just really, really need to continue to push against that idea. There is no safe choice in this business if we want to make great art. There will always be risk. This is a completely bananas business model in terms of financing films. Everyone is taking risk. So let's bet on, people that, to Nayani's point, are delivering and creating equitable spaces and work environments. That feels like a better investment to me than just betting on what we've done in the past.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrea. So Anna, I'm going to jump over to you for a final brief kind of roundup before I wrap up this conversation, hopefully with a little bow, but anyway, that's beside the point. What is your great takeaway from this conversation? You've heard some truth to power, you've heard some concerns, you've heard some big dreams. What's something that you would take away to share with folks that you've been working with, and your colleagues back at the Film Institute, your colleagues around the world? What's on your mind right now?
Well, it's really that everything takes time. So what Nayani, what you were talking about, being a part of first one launch and then sort of being left out, it only happens once. The next time they learned, and it is really hard to think of everything from the beginning. But the more we do, the more we learn, and the more we can share with each other. And I just believe that it's really important that we add on to this knowledge by my motto, stop talking and start acting, to always try new stuff. Because I think that that is the only solution. Because when you try, it can be the wrong thing, but then you can correct it. But if you don't even try, but only talk about it, nothing will happen. So if we all continue and learn and give each other energy, because it's really tiresome to be advocates for change work. And I understand really for the ones that are struggling for getting the money and getting the possibility to actually tell your stories, that I hope that you find energy by connecting to other women and other people that have challenged the system and learn from their tactics. I think that is one of the most important things we did at the Swedish Film Institute, was actually connecting women that had actually gotten the bigger budgets with women who never seemed to get them, and learning from how did you actually do? How do you round the gatekeepers? How do you keep on getting energy when you're getting your 100 no? There was a group of 10 women in that group, and 5 of them got to do their next film. And there are actually women getting to do bigger budgets. So we will just have to endure.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Anna Serner, Andrea Wilson Mirza, and Ella Cooper, who's had to leave us, Ann Marie Fleming, and VT Nayani. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your experiences, your dreams, and predictions for our future moving forward intersectionally towards bigger budgets. Thank you so much to the St. John's International Women's Film Festival. And a shout out to my organization, which is celebrating 25 years this year. Part of that continuum that we've been talking about. We're just part of the journey. And I wish you all great success, and enjoy the rest of the festival.